Thank you for coming today. This is a 30-minute presentation, probably a little bit shorter, on selecting a journal for your paper. And sorry, now I'm figuring out, there we go. Okay, so I'm your host today, Elizabeth Staten. I'm a senior instructor in the Department of Family Medicine. So this is our second of 4 seminars that I'm hosting this spring. So today we're talking about selecting a journal. 2 weeks ago was developing writing habits and accountability. And if you missed that, I have a recording of it that you can view. And then in another 2 weeks, we're gonna do a 30-minute session on revising to reduce. So shortening documents either by word count or by page length. It seems to be a common thing that people write a little bit more than is allowed for whatever their document or their situation is. So we're going to go through that. And then the final one that's scheduled is an hour-long session on writing for a particular audience. And that one is going to involve people who are attending will do some writing, and then we'll have a lot of discussion time as well. So that one's a longer session. So I have a couple polls today, and here we go. Okay. So you should see a poll on your screen, which is just a general question that I would love for you to answer about how many journals have you submitted to? So not necessarily how many papers, but how many actual different journals. All right, I think I'm going to close it in 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. So now you should see the results on the screen. So it looks like most people have a fair amount of experience in submitting to different journals. So it's good to know that you are all somewhat experienced. Nobody has 0 journal submission experiences. So I'm going to close that. So when I pick a journal for a paper, a lot of times I have at least part of a draft started, possibly even most of the draft put together of the main findings of whatever it is that I'm trying to share. So the first thing in actually picking a journal that I recommend is to ask yourself who should read the findings, because that should really drive the selection of the journal. If you have a message that's specific to physicians or specific to policymakers, those people might read different journals, or you might need to look at specific venues to reach them versus more general journals that have a broad readership. So I think it's really key to figure out what the main audience is for your findings, and then ask yourself, what journals do they read? If you have a guess, then the next thing that I recommend is looking at the scope note on the journal page, which will tell you more about what the journal editors and the journal board feels they are covering and the type of readers that they have. If you don't have a guess of what journals your ideal audience reads, then I do have some suggestions that we're going to cover a little bit later. So here's the example of the About page for the Annals of Family Medicine. So in this page, it's like general information on the journal, but I think there's some key important things that you can find. So first thing is that they believe they are talking to scientists, practitioners, policymakers, patients, and communities. So I think that's helpful to know although it's rather a broad list. So you can take that to mean that they think they're everything to everybody, or that they really have a broad readership. The next thing that I think is important in this is that they talk about the type of research that they like to publish. So clinical, biomedical, social, and health services research. And that they publish original research, methodology, theory, and essays. So I think that's a good thing to note, because if you have written up a case study or a review paper, this might not be the journal for you. Now, beyond the about page on the journal, there's usually more information in the instructions for authors. So this is just a screen capture of the start of the instructions for authors for the Annals of Family Medicine. And in their overview section, they have a little bit more information. Some of it's some of the same type of information that was on their about page, but it describes more of the type of work that they like to publish. So again, if your publication is totally different, then the mismatch will make it not worth your time to submit. It's kind of like when you're writing a grant. If you're writing a clinical studies grant to an organization that never funds clinical research, then it's a waste of time. So this is similar of making sure that what you're aiming for is a good match with what you have. So I have another example. This is the Health Affairs website, and it is their About page. So here they make it clear that they like to publish health policies issues, and they have a specific readership that is the government, health leaders, scholars. So this is not necessarily your clinician in a small practice who's just looking for information on how to care for diabetic or patients with diabetes. So this will help you know if that audience that you have in mind, if it's a match with Health Affairs. So this is a screen capture from their instructions for authors, and it has a little bit more about the fact that they're a peer-reviewed journal and what they like to emphasize. So they're talking about public and private sectors, and a little bit more about their interests. So you can see that by just doing a little bit of research, and this takes 10 minutes on the internet to find these pages and to just see if it's a good match for you. But then if you don't have any idea what journals your audience reads, then I think there are a couple of approaches. The first one I recommend is looking at your reference list and look at the journals that you're referring to, because it's likely that that the topics might be of interest to the editors there, or if you're referring to certain types of methods, and you know that that journal has published that before, that will get you going in the right direction. My other favorite resource is this website, the Journal Author Name Estimator. And I am going to stop this share for, let me see. I want to pull up this website. Is it? Okay, this is a website that will analyze whatever you put into this box and then look for matches in papers that are listed in PubMed. So you can just put your title in here. You can put some keywords. You can just put some general words describing your paper, and it will give you an example of or it will match it up with published papers so that you can look at the journals. So what I've just copied to my clipboard an abstract from a paper. This is actually a paper that's been published. So you just put your abstract in here, and then you say find journals. So what you get is a list of journals based on the confidence. Now, you might think that 21% confidence isn't very good, but there are so many papers in PubMed that using this tool, I've never seen, you know, a much higher confidence. So if you click show articles, it's going to show you the actual links to the articles that match up with the abstract that you put in there. I think this is helpful because especially if you haven't really refined your abstract yet and you're not sure that it really represents your paper well, this, if you look at these articles and they're way off from whatever you're trying to publish, then you might want to go back and change the words in your abstract to try and get a better representation of the paper. So the other thing that this shows is this article influence, which is a measure of the journal's influence. So you can look into this, the website there, to learn more about the actual influence on it. But you can see that some have a high influence, some aren't ranked at all, and that might be because they're not a great journal, or it just might be that they don't have very many papers. So let's see, the other helpful information here is if it's an open access journal and it's high quality, meaning it's not just the kind of journal that you pay to get something published. Those would be referred to as predatory journals, where they kind of take advantage of authors that just need papers. But that's more of a discussion for another day. So Jane, I think, is a useful website because a lot of times I think it brings up journals that I hadn't thought of before. I might think that I'm writing for just one narrow group, like primary care journals, and there's a limited number of those, but coming to here, I might see a broader audience that might be interested in my paper. I'm going to go back to, are there any questions, by the way? I have time for questions at the end, but while I'm switching. Okay. So back to my slides. Okay, so the scope, as I said, and I showed you with the instructions for authors, so you can get a sense for that both on just the journal's webpage and also for the instructions for authors. Now, I touched briefly on impact with the Jane website. There's a number of measures of journal quality, and I will tell you right now that I'm not an expert in those. And that's because my preference is to really look at audience and match the message of my paper with the audience. So I do look briefly at journal, like if I am considering two journals and they both seem to have the right audience, and I think I can get my paper into both of these, I might look at what has a higher impact number, but I don't pull out my hair trying to do that. Now, I think it may have more of an effect on an assessment of your body of work if you're looking at promotion, but I'm also not an expert in promotion, so I think that's probably worth asking people who've been promoted who have a better sense for what the type of journals you're publishing in, what effect that has. But just to also throw out there that the impact factor, for example, has been around for a number of years, and some people swear by it, but there's actually quite a few criticisms published out there about it. So you could look into that, and if that's something that's important to you. Okay, so back to narrowing down your journal selection. So if you think you have something picked out as a possible journal, then look at the papers that they're publishing. The easiest thing is just to go look at the latest issue, see what the topics are, what the methods are that they are publishing. if you're looking at a theme issue, like a call for specific types of papers, a lot of times those are repeating. So you can look at last year's theme issue, like the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine each year publishes a theme issue on practice-based research. So if you were going to submit to that, you could just look at last year's and see the type of articles that they are publishing. So I think that's useful just for checking that your topic, your methods are of interest. And if you have some specific type of paper, then you can look at previous ones that they've published, just to get a good sense for the match. So now I'm going to do another poll. So you should see this on your screen now. What is the biggest influence on your selection of a target journal? Okay, I'm going to close in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Well, I have to say that I'm happy to see that somebody doesn't always start at the top and work their way down, mainly because I think you would spend a lot of time and effort submitting to the highest tier journals and then trying to work your way down to something else. It can be discouraging. I am very curious though, because half of you said something else is your main influence. So I want to pause here and discuss that for a bit. We have a couple minutes. I'd like to know what else you take into consideration. So if you want to just unmute and say, there's not that many of us on here. You could also use the chat.
Elizabeth, I'm happy to jump in. And I think, similar to what you were saying on a previous slide, as you think about the intended audience and where your article could have impact or influence, I start with that. So for me, often the biggest sort of dichotomy, is this a policy-oriented article or is this more of a clinical piece? And so then I think about where, which policy circle, for example, in terms of readership that this will have. Like, do I want to impact policy among clinicians, or do I want to impact do I want to get to what everyone in Capitol Hill is reading through health affairs or something like that? So that's, because policy is a large umbrella. And so figuring out, sort of dissecting which is a target audience that you're trying to get at, and then what will be they most likely pay attention to and respect.
Thanks, that's helpful. Anyone else that picked that something else?
Elizabeth, this is Natalia. I can jump in here. I usually assess a fit of my article with whether the journal has published similar articles or articles on a similar topic, in terms of does my work align with the typical content that they publish or not?
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Anyone else? You don't have to. Okay. Using instructions for authors. So once you have picked a journal, then you go back to those instructions for authors and go through and make your document fit their requirements. So most of them really want the same thing. They just tend to have little nuances that can be a little frustrating when you think that really they could probably all do some sort of standardized thing, but that's not the case right now. But in general, you have a title page that has all of your authors, their credentials, their institutional affiliations. that may be a separate document. Some journals want that separate so that their peer reviewers don't receive it, so that it's blinded. You'll have the abstract, which will have a word limit, and you'll find that word limit in the instructions for authors, as well as the limit for the body of the paper. Then you have the reference format, and in your instructions for authors, a lot of times that's like a page and a half of instructions, but I want to give a plug here to using EndNote software. It's free for anybody at the university, and our library has a lot of training opportunities for using that software. And it really is a time saver, especially when it comes to later, if you need to resubmit a paper to a different journal. With a few clicks, you can change the format. So I encourage you to use EndNote. Tables will sometimes be at the end of your manuscript document, or they may be in separate files. And then figures are almost always in a separate file, and you'll find in the instructions what sorts of files are acceptable. Some of them only want graphics files. Some of them you can use a PDF file, but they all have information on what should be included in those files. Like the figure legends, you usually don't want that at the top of your figure. You want that to be separate so that the journal can put that in their font, and when they do the layouts, they don't have to have the title appear within the figure and above it as well. You'll nearly always be submitting a Word document that is double-spaced and may or may not have line numbers. The other things that are going to be specific to each journal is where they want information on your funding and your conflicts of interest and your acknowledgements. Sometimes that all goes at the end of the document. Sometimes you put that in directly to a submission website. Sometimes it's on the title page. So just pay attention to that, because that's definitely not standardized. And then really the instructions for authors, as I showed before, they have a lot of information about the journal's outlook and the type of papers they want. But when you're at this stage, you want to skip down to the section that's really discussing formatting your manuscript. And that wraps up the slides that I have today, but I would love to hear if anybody has any additional questions. So I'm going to stop the share here, and we have 15 people on, so you can just unmute if you have a specific question or anything that you would like to share. Well, sounds like I covered everything and answered all questions.
I had a question. I know there's the approach of writing your manuscript and then adjusting it to the journal requirements. Do you ever go the other way and sort of pick your journal and then write the manuscript from there? I know, of course, if certain journals are going to call for certain papers, that's one way to do it. But
yeah, I think that's sort of the ideal situation, because it's really starting with your audience and writing everything from the beginning with that audience in mind. I guess it's just my experience that most people have something put together. They have an outline, or they have findings from a study that they already, at least in their heads, have put together into like a package and a message. And at that point, people start. But definitely I think you would have a better sense of writing and reaching the needs of that audience if you started with that in mind. So, and that would save you going back and reformatting things as well to meet a specific journal's needs. Anything else? I think we're just about at time. I appreciate you spending your half an hour here, and I will send the slides and a link to the recording afterwards. And in 2 weeks, we have the next session that you are welcome to join. Have a good day.